Our lecture this morning, we're going to begin looking at the basic conditions required for healing in the human body. Number one is pure air. You can go 3 months without eating, though you wouldn't be too well. You can go 3 days without drinking, but you can only go 3 minutes without oxygen. It is oxygen levels that are very high in pure air. Notice the law number 1 of the 8 laws of health isn't air, it's pure air, because pure air has a far higher oxygen content on it. But what I want to do before we have a look at how you can increase the oxygen content in your body, I want to have a look at what oxygen does. Let's make a list. Oxygen. What does it do? In the human body, it invigorates. This is the effect that it has. The effect of taking great amounts of oxygen in the body is that it invigorates, it vitalizes. I would even go so far as to say oxygen electrifies. To understand why it does that, we need to take our minds back to our lecture on Monday where we looked at the aerobic cell. An aerobic cell is a cell that uses glucose and oxygen to give energy, compared to the anaerobic cell, which doesn't use oxygen. The aerobic cell will deliver 18 times more energy than the anaerobic cell. That explains why, when body is well oxygenated, this is the effect. Oxygen also soothes the nerves. And everyone on planet Earth in 2012 go through times where they need nerve soothers, am I right? I remember when I had my first baby, and she's 35 now, an old lady said to me, if your baby won't stop crying and you're getting upset, lay the baby down, go outside and breathe very deeply. What was she telling me to do that for? Because she knew that oxygen would soothe the nerves. I better put an S there. We have many of them. How do you know when someone's getting a little bit irritated? You hear them go, yeah? Do you know, they don't know why they do it, but the body's actually saying, well, they're going to blow a fuse, take a blast of oxygen. On the other hand, what does lack of oxygen do? Hypoxia is a name, a medical term for lack of oxygen. The severe symptoms for lack of oxygen are blue top lip, blue fingertips, and the paramedic looks for that. I have a friend who's a surgeon. She says you can tell when you cut into a person if you're into venous blood or arterial blood. Arterial blood is the system taking the blood away from the lungs, goes into the heart, then into the lungs. Venous blood is the blood coming back. You see, oxygen gives blood the red colour, and when the oxygen is gone, the colour of the blood is blue. That's why some signs of severe oxygen deprivation is the blue fingertips and the blue top lip. But there are many people who are suffering from oxygen deprivation, but they're not quite to the blue lip stage. What are some of the symptoms? Fatigue. The person feels like they've climbed a mountain, they've only just got out of bed. Lethargy. They can't even get out of bed. Nausea. Stomach doesn't have enough oxygen. Headaches. Brain doesn't have enough oxygen. Not the only cause of nausea and not the only cause of headaches, but they are some of the symptoms of hypoxia. One of our daughters, we've got a few daughters that have adopted us as parents. One of our daughters, when Michael learnt to fly, she decided to learn to fly too. And I remember her telling me that when she was studying to be a pilot, she had to study hypoxia because sometimes up in the plane, this can happen. And one of the symptoms, she said, is euphoria. And one of the problems with euphoria is the person doesn't even realise these things, and that's why they must study it, because that feeling could be a symptom of hypoxia. I find that there are many people today that are drifting in the haze that lies between optimum health and severe illness. Do you find so? And when you say to them, how are you? They say, all right, not too bad. What's not too bad? Not too good. How many people, when you say, how are you? How many people say, fantastic? If people said that, you'd probably go, yeah. I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in just existing. I want to live. Live life to its fullest and experience, this right till the day I die. There is no reason why not. They've given this a name. It's called chronic fatigue syndrome. Chronic fatigue syndrome has one cause. It's lack of oxygen. Now, you might have 20 people with chronic fatigue syndrome, and the threads that come in to cause it can be different in every case. It might be slow digestion, it might be poor digestion, it might be chemical sensitivity, it might be heavy metal poisoning. The causes are varied. You probably have a look at almost over 100 causes of lack of oxygen. But everyone with chronic fatigue syndrome, what are they wanting? They're wanting this. So let's have a look at the things that can inhibit oxygen uptake in the body. And let's have a look at the things that boost oxygen uptake in the body. To look at that, we need to study air. Some air is high in negative ions. It's the negative charged. Negative ions are electrically charged oxygen molecules. How are negative ions made? As water droplets pass through the air, they cast off negative ions. Understanding that, you can understand why you find them when the thunderstorm hits. Because you've certainly got a lot of water droplets passing through the air at that stage. The thunderstorm. You've also will find negative ions by the waterfall. You'll find negative ions by the sea. The waves of the sea are constantly creating, that shouldn't be there, constantly creating negative ions in the pine. So you'll also find high negative ions in the air at a pine forest. And the reason for that is all the needles on the pine tree, just a slight movement in the air and they move. And you know plants are constantly giving off a little bit of moisture, and that's why in the rainforest the clouds are born. We had an old friend, he was a German soldier, he's well into his 80s now. He would visit us and he'd look out into the hills and he said, look at the birth of the clouds. And you know how the mist comes out of the forest? So the moisture amongst the trees. But the pine give off the most negative ions because of that movement of the needles. So when we first came here, I looked out the window and I saw a lot of trees, and I thought, we're going to cut a lot of those down so we can get some winter sun in. But where the sun sets in the summer is right behind the casuarina pines. And I said, good, we'll keep the casuarina pines to shade from the summer sun, but also so that the negative ions can be coming in these large windows on the western side of the house. On the other hand, you've got positive ions. Positive ions have more carbon dioxide in their molecule than oxygen. So they have the positive charge. The way to remember it is they're positively bad. They're not the good guys. Where do you find the positive ions? Before the thunderstorm hits. And what's the air like before the thunderstorm hits? Heavy. It's heavy with positive ions. And if a person has had a broken bone or has got arthritis, they'll say, oh, my arthritis is hurting. There must be a storm coming. I think we've heard that. That's because the positive ions have a depressing effect on the serotonin, which can have effect to increase inflammation. You ask the person what their joints are like once the thunderstorm hits, there's no pain then, because now the air is alive with negative ions. You'll also find positive ions in the city. What have we got in the city? We've got a lot of people, and the people are breathing out carbon dioxide, and some of the people are smoking. And cigarette smoke gives out another gas called carbon monoxide. And carbon monoxide is a very dangerous gas for humans because it competes with the red blood cell site for oxygen. What also you'll find in the city is a lot of cars. So it's the cars and the smoke that both give off the carbon monoxide. Let me show you what happens in the red blood cell. Here is the red blood cell. When it comes in contact with carbon monoxide, it forms a very tight union. And because it forms a very tight union, it prevents oxygen being picked up. When this red blood cell goes through the lungs and picks up oxygen, oxygen forms an unstable union. It's an unstable union so that it can be dropped again very quickly. It's like picking up some shopping bags and just dropping them again very quickly. But carbon monoxide, it grabs to the back like a backpack that's all wound around you. You can't let it go quickly. That's why if you go to a hospital, to a ward where they're amputating limbs, toes, feet, most of the people are smokers. Because when a person smokes cigarettes, they're taking in the carbon monoxide, which means some of their blood cells can't pick up the oxygen. And by the time the red blood cells get down to the toes, the oxygen they did have's all run out. And so that's when the toes start to die. You see, the most vital element needed for life is oxygen. Any part of the body that's not getting its oxygen will start to die. And last night we learnt about cayenne pepper. Cayenne pepper moves blood. If someone's toes are stopping to get the blood and the oxygen, what you do is you wrap them in cayenne pepper, bring the blood down. Of course, you've got to stop the smoking. Where else will you find positive ions? You'll find positive ions in a lot of heaters. And the heaters that are the worst are the ones that have the naked flame and take the oxygen out of the air. This is a good illustration, but how we love that fire on cold mornings. But what we do is once it's going well, we close the vent, which means then it's not taking the oxygen out of the room. You'll notice we've got quite a few plants in our room. They purify the air. You notice we've got big windows, have them open a little bit. So if you have one of these fires, just be mindful of it. Keep some of the windows open. You can also put a bowl of water on top when it's going all the time. You will find after a few days there's no water left there. It just keeps the air from being flooded with the positive ions. The best heaters are those column heaters where they don't have the naked flame. Tonight you'll see the series Is Your House Killing You? And in one of the series it was gas heater, the flame that was robbing the air of oxygen and making everyone sick and tired. So heaters, be mindful of the heaters. You know, gas heaters are banned or they're illegal, I should say, in bedrooms now. Not only because the flame can go out and the person could be gassed, but because the air is being robbed of the negative ions. Where else you'll find positive ions is mould. Mould gives off carbon monoxide. We spend a third of our life in bed. And I mentioned earlier, so be careful of the pillows you have. Be careful of your quilts, your mattresses. In bedrooms, I like either tile or wood because you can get the mop in right under the bed. Many people don't diligently vacuum under their bed and the dust builds up. And you know what fungus loves? It loves dark, it loves a bit of moisture, and it loves waste because it's its food. And as Dr. Dingle shows in his series, if you can keep the house clean, dry, with the air and the sun going in, basically there's just no place for this to live. A lady told me this story. She said that her little girl was at a school camp, so she went and stayed the weekend with her and stayed in one of the cabins. When she laid down to sleep in one of the bunk beds, she was on the lower bunk, she got a migraine. And she had a terrible night because of this head. She could barely sleep. And she got up in the morning, she left the room, and the head eased. That night, the same thing happened. She just walked into the room. And she went and got a girlfriend. She said, I don't know what it is in this room. She said, I just come in and I get this headache. And her girlfriend said, let's have a look at this mattress. They picked up the mattress, and it was just a little foam mattress on chipboard. And underneath the chipboard had black mould on it. The mattress had black mould on it. Now, every time someone sleeps on that, we lose a lot of water when we sleep. The water's coming out of the body, and what's it doing to that mould? Just feeding it, just feeding it. That's why the bed always should have slats or wire, so that the moisture that you lose in the night can actually be evaporated. And that's also why you should try and get your mattresses out in the sun. At least once a year, ideally twice a year. Dr. Dingle, he says you get the vacuum cleaner and you vacuum clean your mattress. Be very mindful of that. That's why we never buy mattresses from the second-hand shop, do we? Always buy clean mattresses and try and replace them I guess it all depends on how clean and airy and dry your bedroom is. Obviously, they can be maintained. But many people wake up in the morning miserable, no energy, because of the air that they're breathing in the night. And because they have no energy, what do they reach for? Australia's darling drug today, coffee, to try and give them a little bit of a lift. If someone says to me, "Oh, I love my coffee, it just gives me that lift in the morning," you know what my next question is? Why do you need a lift? You see that? And that's why you have to put the detective hat on and find out what it is. Is there something in your bedroom that is responsible for you waking up with low energy levels? Now, if a person goes to bed late and has a huge meal before they go to bed, well, we know why. They have no energy levels. And that's why you have to tick the box. You know, have I done this? Have I checked this? Have I checked that? But mould gives off the carbon monoxide, creating the positive ions. You can do a lot to increase the oxygen content of your body by just being mindful of the air that you're breathing. You can even buy little waterfalls to put in your lounge rooms now, can't you? We were at I was in Mildura last week, and we went to a Thai restaurant, and they had this magnificent waterfall. You know, it was just wires and the water runs down the wires. That's creating your negative ions. There's something else that can inhibit the oxygen content in the blood, and that is hydration. Something most people would never think about. One morning, I looked at the blood slide of a lady at 9 o'clock in the morning, and her blood looked like that. I always presume I've spoiled the slide. 5 blood slides later, the blood looked like that. I said, "Have you had any water to drink this morning?" She said, "No." You see, we would lose between 2 to 3 cups of water every night. That's why that lady had that terrible situation with that mouldy mattress. I said, "What have you had?" She said, "I've had a cup of tea." Now, many people think they're hydrating themselves with a cup of tea, but tea contains tannin, it contains some caffeine, both dehydrating agents. And if you put that pure white crystal in as well, called sugar, you got 3 dehydrating agents. So if a person wakes up in the morning and has a cup of tea, at the end of that cup of tea, they're more dehydrated than before the cup of tea. Ooh. I said, "What else did you have?" She said, "I had a banana." Now, a banana would have fluid in it, but did you know that your body needs 2 cups of water to produce enough hydrochloric acid to digest the meal? So if you have 3 meals a day on Monday, on Sunday you have to have at least 6 cups of water just to supply the hydrochloric acid to break down the food for the next day. Whew. I said to her, "I cannot read your blood." It's all cut. And by the way, when this red blood cell goes through the lungs, how much oxygen does it pick up? When that goes through the lungs, how much oxygen does it pick up? Can you see the surface area that's been lost? So a person can be suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome because they're dehydrated. And dehydration doesn't just mean not drinking enough water. Dehydration can mean the person's having too much of the stimulants which cause dehydration. Also medication. Medication severely dehydrates. I know when I was a psych nurse, I could always tell if someone was a lot of medication. When they speak, their mouth is sort of sticky. And I know they're medicated because it's really dehydrating them. You can also inhibit the oxygen uptake in your body by the way that you breathe. I never have to ask a singer how they breathe. If you were to learn to sing, your first lesson your teacher would teach you how to breathe with your abdominal muscles, because your abdominal muscles are designed to aid in the breathing process. Have you ever seen a little baby breathe? The whole abdomen goes in and out with every breath. Well, many adults have lost the art on abdominal breathing. And one of the reasons is often the way they sit. Now, we spent a lot of time sitting on lounges before we bought this lounge because of the lumbar support, because it enables you to sit upright. Now, my husband is a very good illustration of the worst way to sit. I'm always saying, "Husband, sit up." It's impossible to use your abdominal muscles in the breathing process if you're at all slouched. That's why Pilates is so important. Pilates exercises strengthens the core, which pulls the spine into alignment, which allows you to breathe with your abdominal muscles. So that's another plus for doing your Pilates. Another thing that can inhibit abdominal breathing is tight clothes. See, your skirt, your pants, you should be able to put your fist in to allow the abdominal muscles to go in and out with every breath. I'm quite liking the more hipster fashion. I know in the 70s we wore these tight little skirts and pants with tight little belts. Shocking for abdominal breathing. I was very glad to be able to homeschool because with my children, at the age of 6, my children would do half an hour a day. By the time they were 8, they were just about getting up to an hour a day. By the time they were in high school, maybe 3 hours a day. You see, growing children should be equal physical and equal mental. And if you're going to veer to one, where do you veer? Physical. The physical. Many children are sent to school at a very young age over desks, and so the habit of slouching actually is encouraged. So you can do a lot to increase the oxygen content of your body by just being mindful of the way that you breathe. Very important to breathe through your own personal air conditioner called nose. Nose purifies the air, nose humidifies the air, and nose cleans the air. Mouth does not do all that. One lady said to me, but I can't breathe through my nose. What's my next question? Why not? Because it's all blocked up. Why? Well, it just always is. Well, it should not be. So the detective hat has to go on. Are you taking one of the 3 common allergens? Refined sugar, dairy products, and gluten. I've seen many people throw their sleep apnea machines away by stopping the 3 common allergens. If someone has sleep apnea, it's usually because of one of 2 things, or maybe a combination. Carrying too much weight, so at night the fluid sort of comes up near the chest department, or they have an allergy, and so there's always mucus around. We had a 35-year-old guy do our program. On the 2nd night, he stopped using his sleep apnea machine. I talked to him 6 months later, and he still has not used it. He had an allergy to gluten, and he had an allergy to dairy. And whenever he ate those foods, because he had an allergy to them, the body would build up this mucus in this area. You see, in China, they never even heard of tonsillectomy, taking the tonsils out. And still in the country regions that eat the native food, there's no tonsillitis. But you go to the city now, where they're eating what Time magazine calls the meat-sweet diet, high meat, high dairy, high gluten, high refined, high sugar. The tonsillectomy figures are exactly the same now as in the Australian cities. Interesting. You know what the tonsils are? They're just the watchman at the gate. They're saying, do something, something's wrong here. So what do? Just take the watchman at the gate out? Who's going to call out now and tell you something's wrong? They're the largest lymphatic or vessel that goes straight out of the body. And God didn't make a mistake when he put them there, yeah? Remember, keep your 6 trusty serving men with you everywhere you go. Why? Why is it happening? You can see by what we've discussed this morning that you can do a lot to increase the oxygen content of your body by just being mindful of the air that you're breathing, the way you're breathing, using your own personal air conditioner, and by how hydrated you are. Very important subject, especially when you realise that cancer cannot live in the presence of oxygen. That statement alone means we should be looking at how we can get more oxygen into our body. The most powerful way to oxygenate your body is exercise. And it's so important, I'm going to devote a whole lecture to that on Friday. The next law of health is sunshine. The sunshine is not the enemy in the sky. He's only been hailed as the enemy in the sky for about the last 50 years, is that right? But we're going to miss sunshine for a minute, and after the break we're going to come back. I'd like to flip over to Temperance now. What does temperance mean? It's not a word we hear much anymore, is it? In the dictionary, the dictionary definition of temperance is not taking anything into the body that will harm it. So there are some things that should never enter. The second part of the explanation for temperance is taking in moderation the good things. So moderation. Some people say, moderation in all things. Would you say moderation in cyanide? Would you say moderation in arsenic? There are some things that should not enter the human body if you're looking for optimum performance. So we'll start with moderation. All good things, even good things, can become poisons if overdone. I have a book by a Dr. William, I'll remember his name in a minute, Beaumont, Dr. William Beaumont, on the physiology of digestion. Because of his years and years of research on digestion, he came to the conclusion it's not quality of food that is of the most importance, it's quantity of food. He showed that even good food, even that food you had for breakfast, which was prepared in the best way, predominantly organic, even if that's overeaten, it can turn to poison in your stomach. He came to the conclusion there's only so many digestive juices released, and if too much food's put in, the body actually just can't deal with them. So all good things should be done in moderation. All work and no play makes Jack a very dull boy. We've come to a strange time on planet Earth where a lot of parents are not teaching their children to work. Have you noticed? Do you know when they love to work? When they're about this big. Encourage it. Oh, but the china will get broken. Use stainless steel. Get unbreakable glass. Because the children love to work when they're little. I had a rule in my home. Child dirties plate, child know how to clean plate. Even if it's just a little one, to get them to carry it. Just something that they're contributing to. My daughter Julia, she was working in a restaurant a few years ago and she had two 18-year-old girls there. And she said, could you girls clean the toilets this morning? And they just stood there. She said, what's the matter? She said, we've never cleaned a toilet in our life. Have they ever used a toilet? I'm sure so. So I say to parents, encourage your children to work. Teach them to work. You know, there's a saying in the Bible that says, if a man shall not work, neither shall he eat. My children knew that saying. And when you teach your children to work, you've now got time to play with them. It should be a balance of all of these. My daughter in America, she said, oh, did my kids work hard this morning? I said, what did they do? I think the twins were 4. I think the next one was about 7, and I think the next one was about 10. I said, what did they do? She said, they weeded and mulched my whole garden. I said, what did you do this afternoon? She said, we went skating. Now, if Emma had done the whole garden, there would have been no skating in the afternoon. That's why I say to parents, when you deprive your children the joy of work, you deprive them the joy of accomplishment, because isn't that what you experience when you work? And you talk to traders today, tradesmen. Do they apprentice young people? They say no. You say, why don't you? They don't come to work. They don't work. You say, can you get the hammer? I don't have to get the hammer. So a lot of tradesmen aren't even hiring young people. Whose fault is that? I have to say it's the parents' fault. So teach your children to work, and then you'll have time to play with them. Balance. All good things should be done in moderation. But there are some things that should never enter the human body if you're looking for optimum performance. And I'm referring to the pure crystallized acid that's been extracted from the sugarcane plant. I consider sugar to be one of the most lethal substances ever to be introduced to mankind. It is as closely related to the sugarcane as heroin is to the poppy plant. And yet actually it's more lethal. It's just a matter of degrees. About 80 years ago, heroin was considered safer than sugar. Whoa. Heroin will kill you quicker, but sugar is just as much a killer. There is more death, torture, suffering surrounding the traffic of sugarcane than the traffic of anything else. Even the traffic of cocaine doesn't come near this one's history. And I'm referring to the slave trade. It is estimated 19 million Africans perished on the sugarcane fields. Some black countries won't touch sugar because they say it's tainted with the blood of their ancestors. But the slave trade has mostly been abolished. What effect does sugar have on human beings? Let me show you. When sugar goes into the body, blood sugar levels rise dramatically. Not when sugar cane goes in, because in sugar cane the glucose is all bound up in fibre and it slowly releases it, which is exactly what your brain needs. The breakfast that we served you this morning, even though it was a vegetable breakfast, it had a lot of glucose in it, but it was all bound up in fibre, and it's going to slowly release glucose, your number one fuel, all the way to lunch. That's what fibre does. But when it's extracted and put into foods, blood glucose levels rise dramatically. Brain says, whoa, overload, danger. Quick, pancreas, release insulin. You see, high glucose demands high insulin. Insulin is the hormone that gets the glucose out of the blood and into the cell or into storage. So very quickly blood glucose levels start to drop. But because it was a crisis and more insulin was released than it really should have been, blood glucose levels are dropping. Down there, the brain goes, whoa, we're running out of fuel. Quick, stop the insulin and release the glucagon. Glucagon's the hormone that gets the blood glucose levels up again. But what does the person do down there? Jelly beans, cup of coffee with 3 teaspoons of sugar. I need a lift. Mars bar, Coke. Will that give a lift? Oh, yes. Up again. Oh, no! Brain says, pancreas, stop the glucagon. Release the insulin. Oh, no, which is stop the... Have you ever worked under such conditions? You wear out. And that's exactly what pancreases are doing. But before pancreases wear out, something else is happening. Here's the cell membrane, and here's the insulin receptor site. And when that's happening, it's quick, insulin, get that glucose in, more insulin. Eventually, the insulin receptor site says, I'm done. I'm sick of the sight of you. So you get insulin resistance. You've heard of insulin resistance? The receptor site just gets to the point where it don't want to even look at it anymore. And it's not long after that that the pancreas goes on strike. I'm worn out. I've just got nothing left. And what's that called? That's called diabetes mellitus. Diabetes mellitus was first documented in England just before the Black Plague. And you see, diabetes mellitus means sugar in the urine. And a doctor found sugar in the urine of some of his wealthier clients. Wasn't in the country because they couldn't afford the sugar. And what's interesting is the Black Plague got out of control in the cities where the people were eating the sugar. But out in the countries, it didn't have as much an effect because the people weren't eating the sugar. And these microbes flourish where there's a lot of sugar around, whether it be in the body or out of the body. So we've got pancreases wearing out in Australia to the point of 400 diabetics are diagnosed daily in Australia. That's scary, isn't it? That's epidemic proportions. Hippocrates has got no mention of it in his writings because sugar wasn't well established when he was doing his writings. Wow. A lady got quite upset with me one day when I said before sugar was well established there was no diabetes. She said, what about the children who were born with diabetes? Why? Why is a child born with diabetes? That means a child's born with a very weak pancreas. Why? Because of the parents' sugar abuse and their parents' sugar abuse. In Australia today, we've got 5 generations of sugar abuse. Let's go back 100 years where the cart took all the supplies out to the country homes. There were big sacks of white flour. There were big sacks of white sugar. When I was a little girl and there was a fete, those of my era, what was it, the fete? Toffees, toffee apples, fairy floss, Anzac biscuits. Anzac biscuits don't go splat until they've got heaps of sugar in them. But I tell you, the consumption of that is nothing compared to the consumption of Aussies today. We'd have fetes twice a year. The amount of sugar that we ate at that fete, kids are eating every day today. That's the scary thing. On Saturday morning, when we look at the mind, I'm going to go in a little bit more detail on how sugar affects the functioning of the brain. But what I'd like to do now is introduce you to its deadly mate. I call them the deadly duo or the dangerous duos. You can call them the DDs. Caffeine. When I was in America last April, a lady gave me a book called Caffeine Blues. Fascinating book. It's in the bookshelf. I always have spoken against caffeine. But I tell you, this book opened my eyes even to a greater depth. And what I want to show you is how he explains, because I think he explains it in an interesting way, of how caffeine affects the body. This is the nerve cell. You have 1 trillion of these in your brain. And these are the receptor sites. You see, these nerve cells don't touch each other. They communicate with each other by little chemical messengers. This is the arm where the messages come out into the little boutons, and then the messages are released and they communicate with the dendrites of another nerve cell. One nerve cell has the ability to communicate with 20,000 other nerve cells. Wow. So the chemical messengers come in, they're encapsulated, they're sent down the axon, the arm, into the little boutons, and then they're released out to the next nerve cell. What caffeine does is it interferes with these little chemical messengers. When someone has a cup of coffee, what happens in their body is equal to if they're walking along a mountain track and suddenly they met a tiger on the path. Now just picture what's happening in their body when they meet a tiger on the path. Woof! What happens then? You get a fight and flight response, an adrenaline response. Immediately, the neurotransmitter called adenosine drops. And the reason adenosine drops is because it's the fuse box. Adenosine's there to help keep precision balance in the brain. The fuse box prevents the nerve cells overfiring. Well, there's a tiger on the path. The fuse box has to go. We've got to pull all stops out. Meanwhile, the body starts developing extra little receptor sites to bring up every bit of adenosine in an adaptation process. Because as you'll see in a bit later, after half an hour, the body says, there mustn't be a tiger on the path because they're not running, they're not fighting. But everything in the body gets set up for this tiger on the path. Another neurotransmitter that's affected is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine rises, and it has to do with front brain function. This is where your reasoning powers are, your judgment, your intellect, and that increases because you've met a tiger on the path. Vroom! You've got to make some quick decisions. Are you going to run? Are you going to fight this tiger? Are you going to climb a tree? Can you see why that neurotransmitter rises? The other neurotransmitter that's affected is dopamine. And dopamine makes you feel good. Dopamine levels rise when caffeine goes in. So you've met a tiger on the path. Why are you starting to feel good? Because adrenaline's pumping. You're going to have to fight for your life. Something else is happening. All the muscles stand up. It's like the trumpet goes, soldiers ready to fight. These muscles are ready to run for their life. Run like you've never run before. Climb like you've never climbed before. And I think we've all heard stories of people in a crisis doing superhuman efforts. This is what happens when you drink a cup of coffee. Digestion stops because we've got to forget about that right now. We've got to run. Blood pressure rises. Blood pressure rises because very soon that pump's going to have to supply extra blood to those muscles that are running for their life. But there's no tiger on the path. There's no tiger on the path. The person's not running. They're not climbing the tree. They're not fighting for their life. So the body goes, whoa, we've got to bring some balance back in here. That's when the receptocytes develop. Body says, whoa, too much acetylcholine. Body, stop making so much acetylcholine. Acetylcholine levels start to drop. What about dopamine? Well, day after day after day this happens, dopamine levels start to drop. The person doesn't feel good anymore. Wow. How would you feel if you met a tiger on the path every day? How would you feel if you met 3 tigers on the path a day? How would you feel if you met 5 tigers on the... Ooh, 7 cups of coffee a day causes mental illness, well documented. 3 cups of coffee a day, it'll just take you a little bit longer to get there. But you can see why most people love their coffee. Their brain function increases and they feel good. If someone says, I love my coffee, I said, no wonder you've met a tiger on the path. If you met a tiger on the path, you don't go, oh, there's a tiger. Whew. And that reaction is what happens when you have that cup of coffee. It's interesting, the guy that wrote the book, he said it was very difficult to get the research because the researchers are drinking coffee and they don't want to look at that. When I was in Los Angeles airport in March, no, it was actually December, just gone. I had to catch an early morning flight. Starbucks cafe wasn't open yet. There was already 10 people lined up. I think it opened at 6:30. And when they come away, they don't have a little cup of coffee. They have a cup of coffee this big. But I have to tell you about my son-in-law. Because a lot of people say, what about Italy? They drink their coffee all day long. They don't have mental illness. My son went to Italy, to Venice, to look at all the architecture. He just had a backpack and a bike. And he went to one restaurant. He's never had coffee in his life. He's been a vegetarian all his life. Never smoked, never drank, never had drugs. Now pushing the coffee. Oh, you must have the coffee. All right, had a cup of coffee, couldn't sleep for 3 days. Imagine this guy, you know. Meet a tiger on the path, you know. It takes 3 days for the nervous system to adjust. He thought, oh, now I know why I don't touch that stuff. Last day he was there. It was morning. He was having a beautiful restaurant in a little Italian cafe. 5 waiters came up. You haven't got coffee. He said, all right, I'll have a coffee. They gave him a tiny little one called a shot. He had it. There was no bitterness in it. He said it was rich, creamy. He got no reaction. He went home and he talked to his mate who's a skipper who grew up in New York. He said, I'll tell you what happened. He said, I grew up in New York. I worked in an Italian restaurant. 2 years they trained me to make coffee. And I thought I had it right. And I went out one morning, took it to the boss. They smelt it, threw it on the footpath. He still hadn't mastered it. There's a certain way to make it where you don't get caffeine. And this is what the Italians do. They pack it just right. It has to be ground just right. And the boiling water has to pass through that coffee in 4 to 6 seconds. And no caffeine will be drawn into the coffee. There's your little shots. So I'm down in Mildura with my daughter who works in an Italian restaurant. I said, have you got anyone that works for you that can do it? She said, out of my staff of about 15, there are 2 that can do it. It's an art. So that explains why the Italians drink it all day and they don't have mental illness, because there's this special way where you don't get the caffeine and you don't get the bitterness. But careful, it might take 2 years to master it. Isn't that interesting? Because how many people quote that? Well, I tell you what those guys are drinking is not instant Nescafe coffee. How much mental illness are we seeing in Australia today? Phew. 45% of Australians at some time in their life, the figures show, are suffering from mental illness. Phew. That's big. There's something wrong. Is it because of Australia's new darling? You know, the shop, Death by Chocolate, they're right. They're actually right. Nothing wrong with one little square of 85% Lindt dark chocolate occasionally, but not many people can do that. Every year, and 4 registered nurses have told me this at different times over the last 15 years, every year children are admitted to casualty with chocolate poisoning. That one doesn't reach the newspapers, does it? Mercury. Mercury is neurotoxic. So any dentist that tells to you there is no scientific research to show that there's anything wrong with mercury, why is it classified as neurotoxic? It is one of the most toxic metals. Now, it's such an interesting metal. It's the only liquid metal. And I think as children, maybe most of us, a thermometer broke, and it's such an interesting thing to play with. But it's a neurotoxin. You've heard of mad catter's disease? The hatters used to put mercury on the felt hats because it's a fungicide. Oh, it's a fungicide, all right, it'll kill everything. And they went mad because through the pores of their skin, the mercury was going in. In America, mercury was banned for 150 years. The American Association of Dental Surgeons had the same guidelines as the European dentists, which was no mercury. And some of the dentists were getting irritated because they liked this mercury. You see, they put mercury with silver and tin and copper, I think it is. And there's very little sensitivity to silver. You know, something like 10% of people are, but there's a high sensitivity to mercury. And when they put the mercury filling in the mouth, it sort of molds to the tooth and then sets, and that's why the dentists love it. And it's antimicrobial. It's antimicrobial, all right. It's anti-life. So a group of dentists in about the early, I think it was very early 1900s, they formed the American Dental Association. It's called the ADA, and they used mercury. So this substance that had been illegal for 150 years, they legalised it, just because they had quite a few dentists and they had a bit of push. Something that was banned now became legal. Did it suddenly become safe? No. History shows that within 6 months of mercury fillings being used in France, the first case of multiple sclerosis was documented. What's multiple sclerosis? This is the myelin sheath. It's a protective sheath around the arm that takes the messages out. When that myelin sheath deteriorates, there's your multiple sclerosis. Dr. Hal Huggins has written a book called Solving the MS Mystery, and he shows the clear link between mercury and multiple sclerosis. He was interviewed a few years ago on the link, and he said, if I see 1,000 cases that clearly link multiple sclerosis and mercury, I'll write a book. Well, he's written the book, and it's a big, thick book showing the link between multiple sclerosis and mercury. It's too dangerous. It shouldn't even go near the body. There is no safe dose of mercury in the body. No safe dose. In other words, we're going to get right away from this stuff. I don't know about you, but I want every nerve cell I've got. I want every brain cell I've got. When that brain cell dies, it's gone. It doesn't remake itself. But on Saturday morning, I'll show you that there is a part of the brain where they're showing that neuronal stem cells can be made. But once that cell goes, it's gone. And mercury is a killer. When mercury from the mercury fillings in the mouth goes into the mouth, it unites with the bacteria in the mouth and it converts to methyl mercury. That's methylated mercury. It is now mercury in an organic state. Now that's its most dangerous because now it can be absorbed into the body. Remember, you've got a hollow tube here. And when it's broken down to methylated mercury, it now gets into the body, goes through the blood-brain barrier, goes through the placenta barrier, and it starts to kill. I was reading recently that on YouTube, these researchers have put up a little site, and you can look at a little video clip of mercury chomping into brain cells, like little Pac-Men. Ooh. So what's the most common way mercury gets into the body? It gets into the body through mercury amalgam fillings. If you've got them in your mouth, please start to have a look at how you can get them out, because mercury accumulates in the tissues. So the longer they're in there, the more the mercury is accumulating in the tissues. It's bioaccumulative, meaning it stores up, and it's a killer. So it's in the mercury fillings and in the fish. The safest fish are the smallest fish. The most dangerous fish are the big fish. So there's your tuna, there's your shark. So if you like fish, go for the small ones, go for the top swimmers, and make it a rare treat, not a regular part of the diet. But you know the most common ways today, because a lot of people are aware of the danger of mercury in fish and in the mercury fillings, a lot of people are getting their fillings removed. If the dentist said there's no proof to show there's anything wrong with it, you know, just give them the name Dr. Hal Huggins and say, have a look at this work. A lot of scientific research to show it. They just have not been seen it. They do not know it because the people that sell them the mercury fillings are not going to tell them about it, of course. But you see, the other thing about mercury, which is different to all other poisons, it's naturally occurring. And it's in coal. So in the coal burning fires, the mercury goes into the air and the wind goes and it can travel for a long way. You'll also find it in fluorescent lights. So in incinerators where people are burning batteries, fluorescent lights, and some paints have mercury in it, that's when it gets into the atmosphere. Alcohol is also neurotoxic. These are the two main neurotoxins. Interesting, they were both banned in America for many years. They're both legal in America today. Does that mean they suddenly become safe? No, I'm afraid we're not going to spend time on this dollar sign here, but there's a lot of vested interests that are more interested in the dollar than you or my welfare. Alcohol is neurotoxic. No safe dose of that. The Australian Health Department have issued a warning there is no safe dose of alcohol. It just shouldn't go into the body at all because it's a brain cell killer. And remember, these guys don't recharge. In America today, it's illegal for a young person to drink under 21. And they put adults in jail, parents, for giving their children a drink of wine after a meal. Wow. Even when they're 20. But you can go to America and you see 15-year-olds driving cars. And there's no real danger because they're not drinking while they're driving. Tragedy is, this Saturday and Friday night, there are young people that will die. There are people that will lose their lives because of this. That's why education is power. Many young people think there's fun. That's why I say to parents, show your kids how much fun you can have without it. Drugs. This is bigger today than most people realise, and the body does not know the difference between legal and illegal drugs. All have side effects. There is no drug that does not have a side effect. We hear about chemical warfare. One of the biggest chemical warfare units is the pharmaceutical company. If the body's designed to heal itself, we shouldn't be putting poisons in there. Tobacco. There's some pretty graphic signs on the side of the road today, isn't there, on tobacco? One of the signs says, tobacco affects almost every organ of the body. No. Every organ, because it affects the blood. It thins the arterial wall, it narrows the arteries, it causes the blood to go thick, so it affects every organ of the body. It also has a terrible effect on the respiratory. Every person that comes here, as you would know, I say, are your parents still alive? If the answer is no, what did your parents die from and at what age? And everyone that died from lung cancer, what's my next question? Are they a smoker? And in every single case, yes. It's a poison. Lungs aren't chimneys. Monosodium glutamate. Monosodium glutamate causes the nerve cells on the tongue to overfire, and when the nerve cells on the tongue overfire, the food tastes fantastic. But you know what that means? If you put MSG in a lump of mud, it'd taste fantastic. That's a little scary, isn't it? We're going to show you how to make beautiful food without ever having to resort to the stimulants. If someone has to resort to MSG, they've done something wrong with their cooking. Okay? And as I mentioned the other day, when you have organic food, food just picked, the nutrient content is very high and the flavour is very high. High flavour, high minerals. If MSG causes the nerve cells on the tongue to overfire, that means it causes nerve cells everywhere to overfire. And that absolutely happens in the brain. So MSG, in a roundabout way, can cause death of the nerve cell. Chemicals. One of the scariest place you'll find the chemicals is in many bathroom laundry cupboards. Many people are using harsh chemicals to clean their stoves, to kill weeds around the house, to even wash their hair with. You know, this kill mentality, everything's got to be antibacterial. Well, anything that has the potential to kill something small has the potential to kill you. Because there are more microorganisms in our body than cells. Keep the house clean, as I said earlier, you don't have to go to the chemicals. And you've heard of elbow grease, just scrubbing. Just scrubbing. You do a maintenance dose on your house, you never have to go to the big guns. You do a maintenance dose on your body, you never have to go there. So get the chemicals out. There are some little books in the bookshelf, Chemical Maze. There are a few little books there that show you what all the numbers mean. It's very important to become number readers and find out what's in the food that you're eating, what's in the shampoo you're using, what's in the toothpaste you're using, what's in the clothes that you're wearing. Very important to have a look at all that, because like the dripping tap on a stone, all of these things come together to cause disease in human beings. Notice that I've put a very socially acceptable list. All of these things are very socially acceptable. There's no need for me to put heroin, arsenic, cyanide there. We all know that they're dangerous. It's a pity that I have to put mercury there, but it's surprising the amount of people that don't realise how dangerous it is. It's a killer and it's a neurotoxin. One of the most dangerous things with mercury is when there's mercury in the teeth and gold, because a chemical reaction happens between them. Gold is not as nasty as mercury. So if you've got gold and mercury, have the mercury out as soon as possible, because the gold, it really doesn't react near as bad. It's not a neurotoxin like mercury is. This is why education is power. Many Aussies are killing themselves without even realising the effect of all of these. I'm going to give everyone a break now. Please have a fun.